Boom. And we are live. I'm Anthony Dream Johnson, co-founder of the Redman Group, CEO of 21 Studios, founder of the 21 Convention, the 22 Convention, Make Women Great Again, and several other online things that trigger the shit out of feminists, SJWs, and other losers. On today's episode of the Redman Group, episode 105, titled with Justice for Men, I'll be joined by, former Redman Group panelist, or still current. It's been a little while. He's taken a hiatus from the show, busy with stuff. We'll be joined by DDJ, aka Doomsday Jesus, and welcome to the show, man. Boom.
Hey, man, how you doing?
Doing pretty good, man. Fuck yeah. Good to have you back, man. It's been a couple weeks since you've been on, at least.
Yeah, I've just been retardedly busy. I've been doing a lot of traveling and, working, like I said, with a couple different law firms now. So it's been rough. It's even gotten a little bit worse because I had a death in the family, and I've had my computer was failing on me. So I'm on my backup system, but I've had to do a bunch of, forensic recovery on my hard drive recently, just because I've had it for 6 years and it was time. So
yeah, dude, same thing. We just the hard drive, I have to send it off to get the fucking data off it, which lost on the other day. I had like 30 of them, like these huge fucking drives. So I feel you.
Yeah. So that's kind of the program there. I've also been taking a little extra time too, because I've decided that not only am I going to start de-Googlifying my life, but I'm going to start de-big teching my life. So I just bought a new desktop and I'm going to switch over to Linux finally, permanently, once and for all. Nice. But yeah, I mean, it's great to be on. I think it's great that we should be talking about, justice for men. I think that's something that's not really discussed in the manosphere enough.
Yep. Before we get into today's topics and stuff, some quick sponsor announcements or updates. So number one, 21 Studios is now on Spotify. You can find episodes of the Redman Group there just by going to Spotify, typing 21 Radio or 21 Studios. We're also on iTunes. You can check that out. And soon we'll have a dedicated Redman Group channel as well for Redman Group content. But for now, you can find a lot of the Redman Group content on Spotify through 21 Studios. On top of that, the show is sponsored today again by 21 University. You can sign up for free 30-day trial at 21university.com. Get early access to 21 Convention speeches, interviews, all kinds of cool stuff. And also, we're still sponsored by Tactical Soap. You can see in the description of this video on 21 Studios or Redman Group. You can pick up Tactical Soap, use coupon code RMG or 21C for 10% off. Tactical Soap's fucking awesome. It's got pheromones in it. It's very masculine, very good stuff. And the founder is a big fan of the show, big supporter of both the show and 21 Convention. Finally, we'll get into today's show. So some quick sponsor stuff. Oh, I have announcements too for the end of the show. It'll be pretty exciting. So as DDJ was just saying, today we're going to focus on legal issues for men, justice for men, right? Justice for the manosphere. So the first one I want to get into before we get into censorship, Section 230, things like that we're developing that I think affect the manosphere a lot, is going to be Title IX changes that happened recently, about 2 weeks ago, maybe 2.5, something like that. So DDJ, can you kind of give the guys an intro? Well, first of all, let's pull up a article here. Boom. So this is from NBC News. Betsy DeVos is the Secretary of Education, and recently there were some major changes to Title IX. This was a thing that affected mostly college men, set up the kangaroo courts, did a lot of very horrible shit for men, and they were not treated fairly. So DJ, can you give the viewers kind of an intro to like what Title IX was before this big change and how it hurt men?
Well, Title IX before this all happened was basically, it was a policy that was pushed by feminists back starting in the early 70s with a lawsuit. I want to say it was either against Harvard or Yale back in 1975. And even though they lost the lawsuit, they did get the college in question, who was the named defendant, to kind of change their views on sexual harassment and on this entire situation where it came to harassment. So Title IX is kind of like the anti-discrimination title when it comes to educational sorts of things. And I apologize. I would have brushed up a little bit more on my Title IX knowledge, but I will say this. The thing that's important about Title IX is that starting with the Dear Colleague letter that was issued by the Obama administration, what ended up happening is we started seeing basically a full-blown nationwide witch hunt of college-age men.
And this started in like 2009, right? About that time?
Sometime. I mean, it was going a little bit before then, but a lot of those cases were kept under wraps. And basically what would happen is that these people would start getting harassed and witch hunted and get destroyed at such a level, and they would just go away. And some of these people, like there was a case of a a gentleman who was in college who, I forget his name now, an African American guy who was in sports. He was falsely accused, falsely criminally convicted, and then eventually he had his conviction overturned, and he ended up getting. I want to say he not only went back to college, he finished his degree, but he ended up getting signed to the NFL, if I remember correctly, or at least he got a tryout. Yeah. But the point is that with the Title IX changes in 2008, 2009, 2010. What we saw all these men being falsely accused of sexual assault, sexual harassment, date rape, a lot of these different things where basically they had no leg to stand on. And the majority of the people who were doing the investigations they had no investigation experience. They had no investigation knowledge. They were gender studies majors. They were women's rights activists. They were people who follow the flawed Duluth model and the completely debunked power and control wheel, where every man is a perpetrator and every woman is a victim. And so
is the Duluth model something that you go over in your book, The Feminist Lie, on Amazon right now?
As a matter of fact, I do. On chapter 5 and chapter 6, I talk about the Duluth model. I talk about how it's been debunked. I've done a lot of research. If people go to my channel, #ShillAlert Misandry Today, both on YouTube and on BitChute, they can see a lot of my videos. I do a lot of deep dives into a lot of these particular issues, and I've been doing this for years. And so, but back to the idea of the witch hunt that's been going on against all these men. Starting in 2017, when I started my channel, I basically just said, you know what? Every time you're falsely accused, sue them into the Stone Ages. Sue them for gender-based discrimination. Sue them into the Stone Ages. Sue them in the federal court. And that's what people started to do. And so from mid 2017 until today, all of a sudden, all these colleges, all these institutions, all these gender studies, witch hunting organizations, they started getting sued. And there were a couple law firms that were putting together some research. And what they found was that when men started standing up for themselves, the colleges quit doing any kind of defense when it came to these lawsuits. In fact, when the men started attacking and started suing, what they found was that about between 50 to 70% of the time, the colleges wouldn't even do any kind of defense. What they would do is they'd immediately enter into some kind of settlement agreement in hopes it would go away, because they realized that they were way, way off the reservation. The problem was that the more lawsuits that got filed, the more witch hunting happened, because all these feminists, they're rent seekers. They can't get real jobs. I mean, if you look at this from a supply-demand economics perspective, somebody with a women's studies degree, somebody with a black transgender underwater basket weaving degree, somebody with a any kind of gender studies type degree or social.
They're just moochers. They're moochers.
Well, they're moochers, but those degrees don't prepare you for the workforce. They don't prepare you for the economy, for a supply and demand economy. What they prepare you to do is to witch hunt other people and to take this false, high moral ground and basically go after people. They don't prepare you to do anything else other than just to be a raving lunatic activist. And so what would happen is that the witch hunt started to escalate, and it took to the national stage. And Betsy DeVos, the education secretary, started looking into this a lot more and said, no, this is a problem. And while the Title IX changes when it comes to these witch hunts, while they're drastically improved, they don't necessarily go far enough, but it's definitely a good first step.
Yeah, so that was my next question is how do you view what she actually did? Because we could pull this up too. So let's see. Yeah, or that one. Yeah. So Jack Murphy is someone I was talking about this as well. He's been tweeting about it a lot. He discussed, I think, some of this in his book, Democrat to Deplorable. And we'll have him on the show soon, maybe to talk about this. But he had a family thing this weekend. Some family issues actually he couldn't get out of. But he said actually, Title IX is the single biggest victory in the culture war to date, the single biggest victory ever, numero uno. That's why I voted for Trump. He delivered win. Do you agree with this sentiment, or you're saying that? I mean, obviously it could be let's get into how it could be better, but do you agree with the sentiment Jack's delivering here?
I think it's a good start, and I think it's extremely damaging. Honestly, I think the bigger win is when Trump defunded Planned Parenthood in foreign aid. I think that that's a huge win, because you have to understand that as rent seekers, these gender studies degrees, these feminist activists, they can't get jobs. They can't work for a for-profit organization and make any kind of money because they don't have any job skills. I mean, the person who works at Starbucks has more job skills than your average master's degree in gender studies. So when it comes to that sort of thing, by defunding all these programs and by defunding all of these things, Trump caused huge damage to the left, because what he did was he hit them in the pocketbook, and the less money they have, the less ability they're going to have to use those funds to send them to anti-American organizations like the SPLC or the ACLU. Now, Title IX is a huge win, and I would agree with Jack Murphy in that it is one of the bigger wins, but I don't think it's necessarily the single biggest win. I think that it's probably in the top, I'd say top 3. Okay. But I mean, it's a huge step in the right direction, and it is absolutely, one of Trump's promises. Because I think that when you're looking at trying to take over a society, the first thing you have to do is emasculate all your men. And social justice has done a really good job of that in the United States for the last probably 20 to 30 years. But for example, if you look at like Sweden, I always harp on Sweden is completely has emasculated all of their men, and so they're having all sorts of social unrest and social issues as a result of that, to where they've gone the equivalent of full retard when it comes to how they implement their policies. So their policies don't make sense. For example,
actually, I spent a month there we did the convention there in 2010, and dude, all the men, you're right, are completely effeminate. Like, it's crazy. Just walking around town, it was interesting to be there, and the women are beautiful and stuff, but the men are just absolute pussies. Like, I don't know how else to explain it. It's very, very obvious as walking around doing anything.
Right. And I mean, and really, when you talk about Sweden, you can't really have a talk about Sweden and feminism without mentioning Julian Assange, because Julian Assange is one of the first people who got Me Too'd in the world. And, he's still being falsely imprisoned. The man's never been charged with a crime. He was falsely accused of sexual assault by 2 women. It went through 3 or 4 prosecutors. They never charged him with a crime, and they falsely imprisoned him. But, unfortunately, Sweden and the United Kingdom and Europe, they don't have the constitutional protections that we have here in the United States. But that sort of thing would never fly in the United States. But that said, I mean, going back to Title IX, I think that these changes are huge, because what they're trying to do is, the Department of Education is trying to minimize a lot of these lawsuits, because when these colleges pay out on these lawsuits, they're paying taxpayer dollars. So the taxpayers are suffering. The American taxpayers are suffering every time one of these social justice witch hunts happens. Every time a man is falsely accused of sexual assault, falsely accused of sexual harassment on a college campus, they are using taxpayer funds to fund this gender-based discrimination against men. And then when these men end up trying to hold these people accountable, unfortunately, the taxpayers suffer again, because they're the ones who end up having to pay out, because it's their money that ends up being paid to the people who've been wronged. And I think that that's something that is extremely important to underscore. And it's something that's been completely missing from the dialogue when it comes to Title IX lawsuits, when it comes to civil rights, when it comes to violating men's due process rights. I think that that's something that's extremely crucial. If people understood this is where their taxpayers are coming, or tax-paying dollars are coming from, where they're getting sucked out, and this is part of the reason your taxes are so high, I think people will be like, you know what, I don't want to violate people's civil rights with my taxpayer dollars. Yeah. I don't want to discriminate against people with my taxpayer dollars. And I think that that's, once more attention is drawn to that, I think that's going to be a huge thing. And I think that people are going to realize we need to put a stop to this, and we need to stop allowing these unelected bureaucracies to witch hunt and discriminate against innocent Americans.
Yeah. Ironic that it's a female Secretary of Education that actually went through and did this, given this is mostly, affected men. But yeah, good on her.
Well, I think that that's the other thing that people don't understand, though. And this is one of the big indefensible hypocrisies of feminism, is that feminism was never about protecting women. That's why my book, #Show The Feminist Lie, it was never about equality. It was never about protecting women. I can tell you many, many, many stories of women who have been discriminated against by other women in the name of social justice, in the name of feminism.
Yep.
And I think in the United States, only 16 to 20% of women identify as feminist.
Yep.
So, women understand that feminism hurts them too. And it messes with them in a variety of ways. And frankly, feminism hurts more women than it helps.
Yeah, absolutely. We got to make women great again, man. I'm on the job. President dreams and get the job done, dude.
One thrust at a time.
Exactly. One at a time. Yeah. Yeah. So how do you, are there any things that, Betsy did here with these changes that you would want to see done better? I mean, you're saying it meets pretty much, what Trump had intended with the stuff, but I think they could do better with it. Or that you hope that gets done maybe next, during Trump's second term.
I think Title IX is overly bureaucratic, and I think the whole thing needs to be abolished. Let's have a real conversation about this. Let's actually talk about this in the context that it was meant to be discussed. Okay.
What about abolishing the Department of Education?
Well, hear me out. I mean, I don't know about that. I mean, that's not something I'm prepared to talk about today, as far as at my personal education. But as far as Title IX is concerned, let's be real for a moment, okay? Domestic violence, sexual assault, sexual harassment, they're crimes. They're crimes. We already have an infrastructure in place on the state and the federal level to deal with sexual harassment of women, to deal with the sexual assault of women, to deal with the domestic violence against women. It's called the criminal courts. We have law enforcement agencies for this. So my concern about this is that I think that what this is Title IX policies and these college witch hunts and these internal college mechanisms to hold men accountable for this. I think that when it comes to these things, they're a waste of taxpayer dollars used to witch hunt men. If you are really seriously concerned about protecting women or protecting minorities or protecting the people who you think are discriminated against under Title IX, charge them with a crime. Turn them over. I mean, the Department of Justice has a civil rights division. Most of these law enforcement agencies throughout the country, especially ones in college towns, they have a hate crime unit. They've got a sexual assault unit. The VAWA grants and all the federal grants with regards to, feminism in regards to protecting women, they provide grants so that these agencies have the resources to do the investigation. The problem is that when you file a criminal complaint and you're lying, in most jurisdictions, that's a felony, and you go to jail for it. So the reason they're creating these entirely new and parallel infrastructures of injustice and discrimination against men is to make an end run around actual law enforcement, and it's to allow the deprivation of civil rights of men while keeping women and keeping those who accuse these men falsely from being held accountable for their unethical and dishonest and disingenuous conduct. If we got rid of Title IX completely and said, look, if you are a victim of sexual assault, if you are a victim of domestic violence, if you are a victim of sexual harassment, go report it to law enforcement and let the police actually do an investigation. Yeah. Because number one, law enforcement is the best investigative organization out there. Now, is it perfect? Absolutely not. But they have far more experience in conducting an objective investigation than any gender studies bigot that you're ever going to run across, especially one who is so out of touch with reality that they think that they're the opposite gender. And they ignore basic, well-established precepts of biology.
Yeah.
So I think that when it comes to these types of things, I think that, you abolish Title IX and you go a long way to solving the problem, because what that does is exactly like what Jaron says in the chat. If there's no police report, then there was no crime. And I think that that's extremely important. And so when we're having these conversations and when we're having this discussion, we have to really remember, what is it that we are talking about? We are talking about crime. We're not talking about somebody who's getting their feelings hurt or anything like that. But the goal of the Duluth model, the goal of the domestic violence civil protection order, the goal of the power and control wheel was to criminalize non-criminal conduct. And for those guys that are out there, let me share with you a piece of really disturbing information. If you go under oath in one of these Title IX witch hunts and you testify, that testimony that you provide can later be used against you in a criminal court of law. It can be used for all purposes. And you've never been given your constitutional right to remain silent. You've never been given your Miranda rights. You've never been given your due process. You've never been given the opportunity for a jury of your peers, let alone an impartial tribunal.
Even to face your accuser, right, is what they were
Correct.
preventing too before this. Yeah.
Well, not only even to face your accuser, but under the confrontation clause, you're allowed to face every one of your witnesses against you. You're allowed to cross-examine your witnesses. These are super basic first-year law school concepts of American and Western society's system of jurisprudence. Yet feminists, social justice warriors, and communists want to strip us of those constitutional rights, strip us of our freedoms, strip us of the protections guaranteed by the Bill of Rights in order to be able to witch hunt us at will.
Yeah.
And that's the issue. And so I think that while Title IX does put some protections in place, I think really the main reason they're doing it is to prevent these lawsuits from men who were willing to risk standing up for themselves. And there's an organization out there, I think the acronym is called FIRE, and they're the main lobbying organization for men who've been falsely accused in a Title IX setting, and they've been doing a fantastic job of protecting men's rights. The only concern that I have about, again, when we talk about Title IX, is Title IX does not exist in a vacuum. And that's the other most important takeaway that nobody else is discussing. The stuff, where do you think Title IX came from? I mean, if you think about it, and this is a rhetorical question, but where do you think Title IX came from? Where do you think they got the idea to discriminate against men on such a systemic level? Literally, it's a social justice pandemic against men.
Yeah, it's female supremacists and these bigots, man. They're sexist bigots, basically, is what I would say.
Correct, but where they got it, in other words, what inspired them to do this was the family courts.
Okay.
Men have been discriminated against in the family courts since second wave feminism, and it started to get real bad in the late 70s, 80s, 90s, and now all the way today. And so yeah, it's this whole thing is about the destruction of the family. And it's like what that viewer says there about CPS needs to stop the witch hunts against family. That's exactly what's going on. You see these organizations that come out there, they're like, oh, you have an intact family, you're healthy? Fuck you. We're going to go ahead and we're going to destroy your family, and we're going to create this multi-generational cycle of trauma. Because the biggest indicator of whether or not a child is going to grow up to be a criminal is whether or not that child was victimized or if that child was raised in a broken home.
Yep.
So if these gender studies bigots who populate the Child Protective Services Organization, they populate the family courts, they populate all these different organs, these unelected organs, to chase and discriminate against men and discriminate against families. That's where the big trauma starts to happen, and that's where Title IX comes from. So when we talk about Title IX, we have to talk about the issue in a holistic sense, because the issue is, and this is something that I've actually had to evolve my view, and I know we've talked about it behind the scenes over the last year or so, is that while men's rights is important, men's rights leaves out children in many cases. And so I haven't identified as a men's rights activist in a very long time. I identify myself as a family rights activist, because you cannot have a family without a father. You have to have a father, you have to have a mother, and more importantly, the nuclear family is not enough. You have to have an extended family. You have to have an involved, intact family to raise your children, to protect your children and protect each other. And so, yeah, we have to protect our boys. We have to protect our men, because without men and without boys with healthy levels of masculinity, we don't have anything. And this is something I've been saying for years and years and years. And and as a father and as a grandfather, it was super important to me, and it hits home to me. So it's not like I'm just saying this because I'm trying to armchair quarterback it. I'm saying this because not only do I believe in it, not only do I have 25 years of legal experience, but I've lived it as a single father who won custody of his kids twice. So I understand holistically how the family court system works and how this functions. Because the thing about it is as well, and this might be a point where we transition at some point, but the same bigots that are discriminated against men in Title IX and in the family court and in child protective services, the same thing, the same groups of people, they're the ones discriminating against men online.
Yep.
And yeah, Donovan Sharp talks about if she tells everybody but the police, she's lying. Yeah, but he didn't coin that. I mean, I like Donovan Sharp, and I have a lot of respect for him. But the point is that that's exactly it.
That's what a lot of attorneys go by this rule, right? The minute someone goes to a non-law enforcement agency and they report it, like this comment here talking about a woman who reporting rape to university instead of the police. That's fucking nuts. Like,
well, I can tell you why that's happening. I can tell you exactly why that's happening. So when I first got on the internet and I first created my channel and I first started going online, I had a lot of college students would reach out to me behind the scenes. And one of those college students actually was getting ready to go to a unnamed university in California, a public university. And they received, like a trifold pamphlet on what to do if you're a female and you've been sexually assaulted. And it was a lot of really good, solid information, except it was missing one key element. There was nothing about contacting the police. If you go to college campuses, and I challenge anybody who watches this video.
That was just an oversight, I'm sure.
Exactly.
Being a victim of a crime, don't go to the cops. Got it.
Right.
Yeah.
Seems legit, right? But I would challenge anybody listening or anybody watching this video later. I would challenge you, go to college campuses and go to these areas that promote sexual assault prevention or promote the protection against women or these feminist organizations and see how prominently they display contact the cops.
Yep.
That's the point. It's all about call us, call our nonprofit, because we all need a paycheck. We all need to get grant money. We all need to get donations. Oh, by the way, make sure you click our donation link. But God damn it, do not call the police, because your taxpayer dollars automatically fund law enforcement. They fund the court system. They fund the prosecutors. And when you use the resources you have, you don't need additional resources. And I think that is one of the biggest hypocritical, indefensible issues that the feminist movement has. If you can't use the tools at your disposal, then you shouldn't be trying to create additional tools, because you refuse to do something as simple as file a police report, something as simple as, and here's the other thing people don't understand too. When you file a police report and that individual gets charged criminally, you know what else happens while that case is pending? That woman is protected through a domestic violence protection order provided to her by the criminal court. So there's no need for this idea of having a civil protection order. That's all smoke and mirrors. It's all bullshit. And it's a waste of taxpayer dollars. We shouldn't be funding judges who all they do is hand out DV orders like candy when we have all these crimes that never get investigated.
Well, before we move on to a different part of the show, I wanted to transition to talking about trannies. So I had this article pulled up from the New York Times directly related to Title IX. So I saw you tweeting about this, I think this morning too, DDJ. And basically it says, this is from the New York Times, but it's on archive.is. The New York Times has like a paywall or some shit. So inclusion of transgender student athletes violates Title IX, Trump administration says. So I think you were tweeting about how basically the tranny, cult is getting hit by this pretty hard. Can you talk to me about that?
Well, sure. And I think before we talk about that, I think that there have to be there's some important underlying commentary that I think needs to be said. I think it's interesting that a lot of progressives and a lot of leftists are very secular in their view. A lot of them are atheists. A lot of them are very anti-religion, specifically anti-Christianity. And when I say atheists, I don't mean people who don't necessarily believe in God. I'm talking about leftist atheists who literally hate God, right? They're like
Bolsheviks.
Exactly. So it's interesting that, but here's the thing: their religion is science, right? So the idea is, if you like for instance, back on YouTube, back in the day, they used to have what's called the skeptic community. That was a bunch of atheists. They were a bunch of people that relied on science. They relied on, all this whole factual basis for things. And they're like, we really need to focus on science. It's these secular communities, these secular leftists, that are pushing the ideology of transgenderism. And what's interesting about that is that nowhere in the history of the world, with the exception of the discipline of psychology, does transgenderism exist. And it exists as a psychological issue in psychology up until recently. But there's this thing that's been called entryism, and it was created by communists back in the 1920s.
Too, the most psychological associations consider transgender stuff a mental illness until a couple decades ago, right?
Not even a couple decades ago, until the DSM-5. So the DSM-4 was basically like the big list of psychological issues.
Yeah.
But the problem that you have is that progressives and social justice warriors who want to emasculate men, they've infiltrated all of these organizations. So they've infiltrated and completely control academia. They've infiltrated the courts. They've infiltrated a lot. I mean, obviously sports, we see them all across the media, and, the alphabet people, I'm talking about them as well. And what's interesting is that, biology talks about your gender is determined by your chromosomes. Now, there are people out there who are anomalies, who, they're technically mutants, to use the non-PC term, but that doesn't mean they're not the norm. And the reality is that the transgender community in the United States is 0.7% of our population, and 2/3 of that community spontaneously revert sometime later in life. But the issue here with regard to transgender athletes, I think this is a great idea. I think that we really need to be looking at the biological sex you're born with. And I think that if we enable mental illness and we enable these issues, I think that that's a serious problem. And I'll tell you, I've told transgender people this for a long, long time. If you can show me somewhere in biology, a biology textbook that shows studies that are let's just say pre-1990, where transgenderism exists in nature, where nature allows people to change their biological sex, I'll change my view 180 degrees. 180 degrees, I'll be like, hey, I got your back. Here it is. But the problem that you have is that not only do transgender people mostly have a lot of underlying mental health conditions, they also have a huge risk of suicide because they're mentally fragile, they're psychologically fragile, and you have people playing into these delusions. I mean, it's like saying that, we're going to go ahead and normalize schizophrenia and then get surprised when the fallout of that normalization starts happening to everybody, and it starts getting traumatic and drawn out. It's a huge issue. And I think that it's one that the Trump administration has brought some sanity to. And I think everybody's losing their minds over it. But I think it's a great idea. I think that, if we care about men and we care about women and we care about our communities, especially when it comes to sports and athleticism, then men should not be allowed to compete in women's sports, and women should not be allowed to compete in men's sports for obvious reasons.
I've seen some articles too where feminists are split on this. They're schizophrenic about it because they can't figure out what to do. They're like, what part of our cult do we go with on this? And they don't even know. I don't have it pulled up right now, but I've seen, if you just Google like feminists on transgender issues, you can see they're totally fucking sideways about it.
Traditional feminists agree with my view on transgender rights. However, when it comes to younger feminists, when it comes to millennial feminists, Gen Z feminists, those types of people, they've been indoctrinated away from any kind of critical analysis. I mean, we don't teach critical thinking in school anymore. We don't teach people how to process, or we don't teach them about logical fallacies. In fact, if you look at a lot of feminist texts and a lot of social justice texts, they're so replete with logical fallacies that they're indecipherable word salad. And when you don't educate children, and when I say children, I mean young adults as well. When you don't educate children to critically think about things for themselves and to come up with their own perceptions, even if you agree or disagree with them, the problem is that you have these communities that are completely split. And that's what you're seeing with social justice, is that basically that whole feminist movement where they're split on transgender issues, I mean, that's the left eating itself. And frankly, that's what every parasite does. whether the parasite is feminism or whether the parasite is something more traditional or biological in nature. Once you run out of fuel, once your fight for survival is over and you have no more food, you start eating yourselves. And frankly, you know, I said this in my book, I've said this many times online. Feminism achieved everything it needed to achieve back in the 1960s with the Equal Pay Act.
So I'm just going to do some articles here, get more pulled up before we move on here with this stuff.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a fucking shit show though, man. I mean, it's good though. It's funny that everyone calls Trump crazy, but at the end of the day, he's the one in his administration doing so much rational stuff. It reminds me of Florida. Like during this whole pandemic thing, Florida gets made fun of for decades for being the crazy state. But at the end of the day, Florida's like usually one of the most level-headed and rational things. And it's been I've seen people visiting Florida now, you know, face to face, and they're all like, yeah, where I live is just nuts. And they come here to Florida and everything's just chill. So it reminds me a lot of, you know, what the Trump's going through with this stuff too, doing something, and Betsy DeVos doing something very reasonable, and everyone just screams at her like she's fucking insane.
Well, and what's interesting about the Trump administration is a lot of what they're doing is extremely measured. And again, they're trying to do their best to appear to take the middle path, and they're not being as extremist as their enemies would hope. But I think that when it comes to a lot of the criticism he's received, even the criticism I've received, you've received, a lot of criticism the manosphere has received, I think it's one of those scenarios where we're all being gaslit. And this is right out of Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. They say, look, blame everybody else for what you yourself are doing. In fact, if you look at like the riots and you look at our current state of affairs in the country right now today, especially in the last, 24 to 48, to 72 hours, there's a lot of projection going on, and it's ridiculous. And so, yeah, if you don't have a good sense of self-identity, if you don't have a sense of self-esteem, and you don't have internal validation, you're going to give into that sort of thing. And you're going to be like, yeah, I guess I am a piece of shit because, somebody who I don't know, who doesn't sign my paycheck and doesn't suck my dick, all of a sudden, apparently their opinion matters. It's retarded.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to some more fun news that's been going on very recently. Let's get this pulled up. So finally, we got an executive order from the president, as promised, or more or less. Then we're going to see maybe some big changes with internet censorship, big tech, the way these companies have been immunized since the mid-90s from defamation lawsuits and all kind of lawsuits, because they're treated as platforms and not publishers, right? They're not, Twitter is not considered a news outlet, even though news gets posted on all day long. That might be changing now. So talk to me about what just happened with Donald Trump and the executive order on, Section 230 and everything going on there. Well, what was your initial response to it when you saw it?
It's about goddamn time. This is something I've been talking about since 2017. In fact, if you look at the executive order, let me see if I can find it.
I gotta
pull it up. I'm gonna pull it as well so we can follow along together. Okay. All right. So if we go down to, let me see if I can find it. I apologize here for our viewers. Okay. So if you go to Section 4, there's something important about Section 4. And what's important about Section 4, if you go down to the first paragraph about halfway through, you'll see it says Packingham v. North Carolina.
Yep.
Okay. So when I first started my channel, when I split off from co-hosting another channel and I started kind of stepping out on my own, my very first video in 2017 was called The Social Media Constitutional Crisis. And it was a deep dive into Packingham versus North Carolina and about how the United States Supreme Court has held that social media platforms are public forums. Okay. Now, so we're clear. So for people who don't understand this completely or think they might understand it and really don't, when the United States Supreme Court makes a ruling like that, that's the law of the land. That when they make a finding like that is the law of the land. That is the law of the United States. And what people don't understand is that there's been a lot of litigation that's been out with regard to Google, including my lawsuit that was filed in August of 2019 against Google. When you're talking about social media platforms, yeah, and there's hashtag show alert. There's my GoFundMe. If you want to support my lawsuit, the link will be in the description. Go ahead and check it out. But there's been a total media blackout on my particular lawsuit. But beyond that, I think that the thing that's important about this executive order is that there's been a lot of foreign interference in our online dialogue and in online platforms. There's been interference from China. There's been interference from the European Union. And my lawsuit actually goes into detail. It's a 70-page lawsuit with probably 450 pages of exhibits. It's over 500 pages long in total. And it does a super deep dive. It talks about how, Google is a Chinese state actor. It talks about, again, all the foreign interference. And this executive order protects civil rights. And I think that the most important piece that people forget here is in section 1 under the policy section in the very beginning. It says free speech is the bedrock of American society. I think that that's super important. And people don't really understand. They're like, we don't teach civics anymore in school. We haven't taught civics in 15, 20 years. So a lot of people don't even understand civil rights. They don't understand. They hear some conversation from somebody about Martin Luther King or about African civil rights, but they don't understand it from a holistic perspective. Civil rights.
I'm 31 years old, and as a millennial, we barely got any classes or education on this stuff. Like I know for a fact that in a school of 2,000, my high school, well over 80% wouldn't have a fucking functional clue about any of this stuff. First Amendment, Second Amendment, any of this Bill of Rights. I mean, the courses in education we got on it, and this was in the 90s and early 2000s, before the crazy rise of the internet we see today and stuff. It was minimal, man, very minimal. And I went to good schools. Like these were not like, I didn't grow up in the ghetto, so it's it was shit, man, absolute shit.
Well, if you read the executive order closely and you look at my lawsuit, my second amended complaint, which by the way is publicly available on the internet, you can see that elements of this executive order appear to mirror things I said last year. And if you look at my YouTube channel, I've done 9 videos on this just on my own channel. I've talked about this on other people's channels with, Red Man Group of 21 Studios, Honey Badger Radio, a variety of different areas where I've talked about how free speech is, it is the civil rights fight of our generation.
Yeah.
And because if we can't protect our free speech, we're not going to have a country. Free speech is the bedrock of American democracy. And without it, the American democracy, the American republic doesn't exist. And so this executive order is gold. And I think it's interesting too, because in the Ninth Circus, the court just recently ruled against me at the trial court.
Was that circuit or circus?
Yes.
I think I heard circus.
Yeah. I mean, they're interchangeable when you're talking about the Ninth. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's a technical term, Ninth Circus. They in the Northern District of California, this activist judge just used a bunch of circular logic to rule against me, and now we're going to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And I think that it's important for people to understand that happened last week, and less than a week later, Trump comes out with this executive order. So and it was interesting because AG Barr even talked about active litigation regarding 230. And I'm challenging Section 230 on constitutional grounds. I believe it's unconstitutional. And it really makes me feel good that I said this years ago.
Well, during your lawsuit, you had to serve the Attorney General, right?
I did.
Yeah, that's awesome.
He was served, I want to say he was served sometime in September or October of 2019. So he's actually seen my lawsuit. He knows the litigation is there. He actually referred to it, but not by name, during the press conference for the executive order. So he knows Section 230 is being challenged. President Trump has publicly tweeted that Section 230 should be revoked, which is what my lawsuit is doing. It's challenging Section 230 and saying it's unconstitutional. And that's going to be one of the things that goes to the Court of Appeals.
How do you think if I can pause you, how do you think the CEOs of these big tech companies, Susan Wojcicki, Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, they must be shitting their pants right now? Like they're trying to play cool in public, but I think even Zuckerberg is like, fuck.
Well, Zuckerberg has taken a 180. So remember in 2017, 2018, starting with the Judge Roy Moore case, we saw a lot of the whole, Russia, and fake news and everything else. Well, then they started using fake news as an excuse, right? That is an excuse to censor Americans' free speech on the online public forum. And I say online public forum, I'm using, again, the Supreme Court ruling in Packingham versus North Carolina. And what's interesting about that case is kind of a little bit of a tangent, was that was a unanimous decision. And every Supreme Court justice on the left voted in favor of free speech and of designating these online platforms as public forums. So it's already been done. Like, this is already well settled case law. It's just not something that's ever talked about. So, when we talk about these things and when we have these conversations about, free speech and censorship and everything else, I think what's happening is I think that the big tech companies are losing their goddamn minds. Yeah. Because if anybody was to read my lawsuit, they would see, number one, I accuse Google's advertising mechanism as being a complete fraud, and their whole ad auction, it's based on fraud. When
so
it comes
that's part of the, like, AG Barr, the Attorney General, was talking about state attorney generals going after these companies too, because they're basically deceiving their customers, right? Businesses and individuals.
That's correct. In fact, what they found is that of people that have advertised with some of these big tech companies, what they found is that what's happened is that when they stop advertising, their sales don't go down. So the advertisement on these platforms is not helping the majority of these companies at all. Yeah. And that's, and again, you'll notice none of this stuff was happening until I filed my lawsuit in August of 2019. Once I filed my lawsuit in August of 2019, now all of a sudden the state attorney generals are coming out and going, hey, we need to sue Google and Facebook and all these organizations for antitrust. And the antitrust allegations that they are standing on, like if you look at all of their press releases and news releases and things like that, and you compare it to my lawsuit, it looks like they pulled just from it. I mean, I'm sure they came up with it, some of it all on their own, because again, a lot of this stuff has been discussed for years. But if you look, like I said, my lawsuit is a roadmap to hold big tech accountable, not only for foreign interference, but for fraud, for silencing Americans' free speech rights, and for discriminating against people. See, one of the things that people don't talk about, that, and I thought it was real interesting that Trump really didn't talk about it in these terms either, was that we have a civil rights law in the United States that protects us against national origin discrimination. So a lot of people talk about political viewpoint discrimination. Well, the reality is that we, as Americans, as patriotic Americans who support our Constitution, who support the Bill of Rights, who support the rule of law, who support free speech, Second Amendment rights, those things are American things. They are intertwined irrevocably with the American identity. And for people to discriminate against other people, for people to get censored, for people to get harassed, for people to get assaulted because they support those constitutional rights, those American rights, that is national origin discrimination. This is not a conversation, and it's a false dichotomy to say that it is, but it is not a conversation of progressives versus conservatives. That's not what this is about.
I like what you're saying a lot, because I think a lot of people will agree. And a different way to state it would be that, the Bill of Rights, particularly the First and Second Amendment, they're not just constitutional rights inscribed into the federal Constitution. They're American values. They're that deep in our culture and our heritage. And a lot of people, they would agree with that, but they'd have to think about it first. And so it's legally, they're rights, but Constitution and stuff, but they're values too. They're things we care about, independent, within the Constitution, then outside of it. And I think it's disgusting that these are all American companies: YouTube, Google, Twitter, Facebook, headed by American CEOs in most cases, right?
They're technically headed by Americans, and they're on American soil. But the problem is that their ideology is staunchly un-American, and that's where I'm headed. Is that
it's anti-American? It's hostile. It's not just neutral. Yeah,
correct. And that's my point. This whole paradigm of progressive versus conservative, or liberal versus conservative, that's all a smokescreen. That's not what this is about. This is about patriotic Americans versus un-American pieces of shit who hate our culture, hate our lifestyle, and hate our Constitution. That's really what this is about. It's not about anything other than that. And to reframe it otherwise is it's beta, it's blue pill, it's, I don't want to offend the wrong person. Look,
it's dishonest bullshit.
It is. People have fought and died and bled for our Constitution, for the freedoms we have today. And for us to say, it's just a disagreement between conservatives and progressives, that is a disingenuous reframe, probably invented by a cuck in order to try to change the conversation so that people don't understand that this right here is an ideological war against the American identity.
Yeah. Yeah, I think American CEOs, man, especially, to the extent they're not completely controlled by outside influences, Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey and stuff, as Americans, they have as a fellow American, I have an expectation of them to value these rights and these values. And the fact that they don't is fucking really disgusting. It's disturbing. And
Well,
they should be shamed for it, you know?
Yeah, and I also should say this too. I don't believe that regulating big tech as utilities is the right way forward. I think if we regulate big tech as a utility, all we're doing is creating a unstoppable monopoly for big tech. And if we do that, that is going to damage American society and our constitutional rights more than anything else.
That's the beautiful thing about this executive order, though, right? Because they didn't go that route. They're going. A lot of people don't understand this. They think it's like some big government intervention. It's not. It's the removing, right, of special privileges that these companies got in 1996 to not be like, dude, I'm a publisher. You know, 21 Studios, Red Man Group, Twin Oak Convention. I'm responsible for the shit I say. I'm responsible for publishing content from people like you and the speakers and stuff like that. And if you guys go off on some rant about fucking, you know, murdering people or whatever the fuck, like, I'm responsible for that as a publisher. But you know, YouTube and stuff is not, which is bullshit at this point, because they become, you know, an editor. They become this channel, you know, Red Man Group somewhat, but 21 Studios is heavily censored and suppressed, like most other manosphere content channels and independent content channels. Even like Tim Pool's a guy I think does pretty well on YouTube. Dude, his channel should be probably double the size it is now, but it's been suppressed. Same for Mark Dice, same for Six and Hammer, same for Stefan Molyneux is never going to break 1 million unless YouTube, you know, gets fucking cracked down on. I think you know, for Stefan Molyneux, he's not just suppressed like the rest of us. I think he's actively targeted by employees at YouTube, and they don't want him to break 1 million subscribers. He'll hover in 900,000 something indefinitely. That's not a fucking coincidence. It's bullshit.
Well, and that's something that I talk about in my lawsuit, is I talk about how Google actually removes and actively removes subscribers. They remove followers. They take away notifications. And they do that specifically in bad faith on behalf of their foreign masters to silence American voices and voices outside the United States who promote freedom of speech. But I'll tell you the reason I think that everybody's losing their mind over the executive order is, if you want to pull it up, look at Section 3. Section 3 is gold.
Here we go. Pulling it up now. Section 2 and 3. Here we go. Protecting federal taxpayer dollars from financing online platforms that restrict free speech. Ooh,
correct. So Google and Facebook and Twitter all have government contracts. Okay, they provide government services, whether it be cloud services or you know, Chromebooks or things like that. If these platforms continue to restrict free speech, all those contracts go away.
Nice.
I mean, it's hashtag eat a dick on a national level.
Let's back up a second, because as a layperson, tell me if I got this right, because you know, you've experience in, you know, actually practice working with attorneys, a paralegal. I'm not an attorney, I'm not a paralegal, but I am an entrepreneur, so I have some limited experience with law stuff. But in my understanding, if these companies, Google, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, you know, all this shit, right? If they lose Section 230 immunity from all these fucking lawsuits that otherwise get filed against them, they're just going to get picked apart like by vultures, right? Every fucking vultures and honest people too, honest men. Every fucking mom and pop attorney in this country is going to sue the shit out of them, right? In addition to the states, in addition to the DOJ.
Here's the thing: the issue that I have is that Google and YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and all the mainstream, you know, Twitch, all these mainstream big tech platforms, they are censoring free speech. That doesn't violate the law. It doesn't hurt anybody. And, you know, I mean, if you go online and you say, you know, and you direct violence toward a particular group, say it's, you know, African Americans, Latinos, whites, anybody, right? And you say, go out and practice genocide on those particular groups. What's going to happen is that, you know, you should be held accountable for that. And I think that on the same token, I think that these platforms should have some protection from, basically, they should have some protection from false defamation or frivolous defamation type lawsuits.
Well, that's kind of where I was going with this, though, is that if those companies lose 230 immunity, companies I think like Gab and Minds and BitChute should still retain it, because they're acting within the bounds of how the law was intended, right? And how it's
and my issue with Section 230 is not that the entire statute is unconstitutional. My issue with Section 230, as pled in my lawsuit, is that you should not have your voice censored when you're just exercising your First Amendment rights.
Yeah.
Okay. So as written right now, Section 230 allows these platforms to violate your constitutional rights. And it is specifically said in Section 230, Section C2. And if you look,
they have to act in good faith, right? That's how
yeah. Well, again, who judges whether or not they've acted in good faith? The problem with Section 230 is it's overbroad. Okay. And so, I mean, AG Barr said it very eloquently during the press conference. He said very specifically, he said, people basically, they have stretched 230 beyond its original intent, and now they're using this to silence Americans. If you look at the policy, for instance, you look at the policy for the Communications Decency Act, you look at the purpose that it was made for. They specifically say it's made to promote freedom of speech. It's made to promote freedom of expression. It's made to protect freedom of speech, free from, all these censors. Well, the problem is that what Section 230 is being used for today is being used to silence anybody to the right of hard communism.
Yep.
If you want to speak about well-established biological science,
well, to be clear,
you're getting censored.
I think like 80% of it is, conservatives and even anybody who disagrees with feminism, whether or not you have any involvement in politics, right? Anybody who's an independent content creator, Tim Pool's like a liberal still, right? Dave Rubin's a reform liberal or something. But really, it's there's even people on the hard left, though, I think have been censored and kicked off these platforms. And as much as they're scum and I don't like them, they were just exercising free speech. So I think these companies, even if 90% of it is against conservatives and manosphere shit or whatever, independents, it's against other people too that we would consider hard left, and it's like they're fucking publishers.
Yeah, and I can tell you right now that there are a lot of people on the internet who have been censored who I personally disagree with.
Yep.
But I support their right to say what it is that they say.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, and there are certain groups of individuals who I'm not going to name who I have major ideological disagreements with. But again, they have a right to say what it is that they want to say. They have a right to communicate. They have a right to associate with whomever they want to associate with. You see, not only is the First Amendment about free speech protections, it's about the right of association, but it's also a prohibition. And one of the thrusts of my lawsuit is that I'm saying that the First Amendment prohibits Congress from creating any law that infringes upon the freedom of speech. And that's what Section 230 does. It infringes upon the freedom of speech in violation of the First Amendment. It needs to be rewritten, frankly. It needs to have the constitutional language taken out of it so that people like PragerU, who basically publish videos from a Christian perspective, don't get censored anymore. People like me who publish videos from an American perspective don't get censored anymore. You see, what people don't understand is that, like, look, if you're in another country, if you're in the United Kingdom, if you're in New Zealand or Australia or China or wherever, and you go to Google, there is a separate Google page for every one of those countries. There's google.uk, there's google.nz, there's google.au. All these countries have their own separate Google. However, when you go to YouTube, they don't. So when you go to Facebook, they don't. There's no facebook.uk or facebook.eu. So if the United Kingdom has a separate set of laws regarding censorship, okay, don't use facebook.uk. It's really that simple. You go to facebook.com, which is the American Facebook site, and you practice your freedom of speech. If you're in Australia and you're part of the Australian government, you're like, hey, we have laws against freedom of speech because we're cucks. Well, guess what? You know what? You're in Australia. If you have a problem with your cuck, censoring government, vote them out.
Yeah.
Vote them out and go from there. But the problem is that, facebook.com, Twitter, YouTube, they're not separated by company. They're global in nature. That's why YouTube is like one of the largest websites on the internet. It's not because it's organically large with regard to each country. It's because all the countries get together and hammer the website and go from there. So this could be easily solved by creating separate domains based on country. So if Google wants to continue being the communist pieces of shit that they are, they can go ahead and they can do, google.cuck or google.ca or whatever the Chinese one is. And then they can do all the censorship they want in that Chinese sandbox. If they want to do, in Canada, you want to do google.Canuckistan and you want to, be a cuck like Trudeau, that's fine. You can have your google.ca and you can go there and you can do all your BS, that you have. And that's fine. It's the same way with Facebook. If Facebook wants to censor people in the
way,
UK,
I think Laura wants your babies.
Yeah, well, that happens. So it's all good. So I'm just saying, I think that, again, when it comes to a lot of these people and when it comes to a lot of these governments, we need to be able to protect the American way of life. And if Google or big tech or Facebook, all these Twitter, if they want to censor based on country or based on other governments' edicts, then they need to separate the American version from these other versions. Because I'll tell you what, I'm a United States citizen residing on United States soil. I am not subject to New Zealand's laws. I am not subject to the United Kingdom's laws. I am not subject to Chinese communist cuck laws. I'm not. And for people to say that I am, at best, they are as ignorant as the day is long. At worst, they are malicious and un-American. Yeah. And so these are simple solutions that these organizations can enact that would solve this problem right away.
Question: and what do you think about these crybaby libertarians who are like, just let the market sort it out? Like, just competition. John Stossel's like, competition. Just go use library. Like, I'm using library. I think it's cool, but I'm like, no. Like, there are major problems with what's going on here, and it's not.
If we didn't have corporate espionage, the libertarians would be correct. But the problem is that the libertarian perspective is naive. People don't understand. Like I know the founder of BitChute. I've actually interviewed on my channel. I've interviewed the founder of BitChute. I have had extensive conversations with him behind the scenes. And he has specifically told me his site is targeted by big tech.
Yeah,
okay.
No
they DDoS his websites. Minds.com happened the same way. Gab got deplatformed by Microsoft for using the Azure background.
Well, not even getting into that. In my understanding, a lot of Twitter is owned by like foreign companies and companies that are for friends for China and shit. I don't know the details of all this and like what's true and what's not, but these companies are influenced by foreign nations a lot of the time. And it's
I actually talked about this in my lawsuit where the heads of Google and Microsoft and Facebook actually met with the president of China in Seattle right after Trump won the election during the midterm.
Wow.
So this is not conspiracy theory. This is verifiable. It was actually reported by mainstream media. So, and Google and their whole big tech cartel, they're all acting as an antitrust in an antitrust way by silencing American civil rights. This is an issue. And frankly, I'll be honest with you. I'm really happy about this executive order. And I'm also really happy about the executive order that followed it called the Proclamation on the Suspension of Entry as Non-Immigrants of Certain Students and Researchers from the People's Republic of China.
Nice.
And the reason that I'm happy about those things is because I've been talking about this since 2017 on my YouTube channel, on other people's YouTube channels, and in my lawsuit. And so I think that it's really interesting how everybody's lawsuit gets communicated about and gets talked about, yet it's complete radio silence when it comes to mainstream media, when it comes to my lawsuit. Everybody's afraid to talk about it. It's like, oh my gosh, you have a difference of opinion to me. I can't discuss it. I mean, look, I know people online right now who won't even go and not even just live stream with me or even, have recorded videos with me specifically because they disagree with my viewpoint and they don't actually want to agree to disagree and talk about where we have common ground. One of the things that I like about the Red Man Group is that, we can have conversations about things where we disagree. And yet we understand that as Americans, we're going to disagree on things and we're going to challenge each other in the marketplace of ideas. And sometimes I'm wrong and sometimes somebody else is wrong. And that's just the way it is. But we're not so cucked where we can't turn around and go, oh, well, I learned something today. It's like Muhammad Ali said back in the day. He said, a man who thinks the same things at 50 that he thought when he was 20 wasted 30 years of his life. And So all of our views evolve, and all of us have the opportunity to learn and to take ideas from each other, and to evolve ourselves and evolve ourselves intellectually and psychologically, and even as far as our identity is concerned. But you get these people out there that they're so afraid of the marketplace of ideas that they try to censor you, they try to silence you, they disparage you, they do ad hom attacks, and they're so insecure. And a lot of these people, they're the wannabes, and they're, oh well, I'm comfortable in my identity, but I got to go attack you because I'm a cuck. Not talking about certain frauds,
individuals.
Yeah, certain frauds or individuals who write books based on other people's blog posts.
Yep. And then role play about open marketplace of ideas. The red pill is open source. Everyone can contribute unless they're purple pill or blue pill, because I declare them to be. But also the red pill is anybody. Anybody can be red pill and can contribute, except when I say they can't. Except that when I say that they can.
Right.
Yeah, fucking clusterfuck of idiocy. Frauds. They're frauds. Yeah, I wonder what's going to happen to them this year. We'll have to see what happens with them. I'm very curious.
Well, I think the problem is that when you become too much of an extremist, I think you paint yourself into a corner, and then you just kind of fade. And I've seen that a lot with other YouTube channels as well, or at least other video content creators. And again, in going and talking about letting the market handle all this, people. I mean, the problem is that when you have bad behavior.
Yep.
You have to be able to deal with the bad behavior. You have to be able to say, look, you are not allowed to act unethically. You are not allowed to act criminally. You are not allowed to create these Ponzi schemes in order to silence Americans' free speech. The reason free speech exists is to give us the right to offend each other.
Yeah.
Okay. It's your emotions don't matter. What matters is that we have meaningful communication in the marketplace of ideas, and we are allowed to express those ideas. And if you don't like the way we express it, well, that's what My Doll and tampons are for. Yep. So
the only kind of speech that even needs protecting is offensive speech. No one's coming after you for fucking giving classes on basket weaving. It's because you have something controversial to say, and people want to shut you the fuck up. I mean, the manosphere is a great example of this. How many people have been deplatformed and threatened to deplatform and suppressed and this and that? In real life, Stefan Molyneux getting bomb threats, or on the internet getting suppressed, is a good example.
Right. Or even like for example, Donovan Sharp, who's had multiple channels shut down because somebody doesn't like what he has to say. And frankly, freedom of speech protects offensive speech. Hate speech is not an exception under United States law.
Hate speech is free speech. Yeah,
it is. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and again, there's a whole different concept of the difference between free speech and discriminatory speech. But the problem is that the leftists and the progressives and the communists have rebranded all these different offensive things as hate speech, or as offensive speech, or discrimination and everything else. They've changed the meaning of words in an effort to justify what is completely unjustifiable under American law and under our constitutional culture.
Yep. Yeah. Speaking, by the way, of censorship and all that cancel culture crap. Yeah. People that I forget sometimes. I've gone through so much of this crap. I just kind of like, it's water off a duck's back at this point, but there are still women calling up the company voicemail, screaming at me, trying to get us canceled from venues and shit for a 22 convention, Make Women Great Again. The men's events, they don't really care so much about for whatever reason, but the women's one, they're really terrified of, and they're really angered by it. And they're really coming after us. They were hunting for that fucking venue for this when we had it scheduled in the spring, right? I heard Planned Parenthood in Orlando is getting involved. All kinds of people they were going after my family members and shit in Orlando. It was nuts, man. I mean, these people are vicious, un-American, anti-American sacks of shit. They'll never stop me, but I wonder sometimes if it'll be a fucking field day if they ever find me in real life. Like, I'm not going to put up with this shit. Zero. I have zero tolerance for this crap.
Sure. Well, I think that's a good segue to talk about our third subject of the day.
Yeah, let's get going on that. So it looks like America just had its most recent Rodney King level riot. This shit is getting fucking insane last night in particular. So just for posterity's sake in the future, many major American cities last night had really serious rioting and looting. It's whatever started, however peaceful it supposedly was to start with, the shit escalated real fucking quick across the country, Atlanta, Minnesota, San Diego or something. It's parts of California, Dallas,
Oh,
Texas.
well, listen. It's happened in Louisville. It's happened in Detroit. It's happened in Chicago, Denver. I mean, the rioting is in every tier 1 city in the country in some form or fashion.
Oh, Brooklyn, New York. Yeah, that's right. New York City too. Yeah, it's crazy. It's fucking nuts, man. I mean, it's totally. You know, we'll get into what would you believe is going on with it and stuff. But as far as the George Floyd guy, like this is all disrespectful to him at this point. The cop who killed him or whatever is arrested at this point. All 4 cops that were involved were immediately fired. And it's like, what is burning down Wendy's and AutoZone and Target have to do with this guy dying? Nothing. It's fucking nonsense. Looting and shit. These people are scumbags, man. Fuck these losers. But go ahead.
Sorry about that. I had myself muted for a second. I was looking for a tweet that I put up today. Really, I think that this tweet kind of summarizes a lot of what the main issue here is. And this is like, when I say the main issue, I mean the real issue. Okay. It's leftist governments enacting leftist policies and laws that victimize their leftist citizens and destroy their communities. Yet they blame conservatives for their own failed leadership. This type of gaslighting is right out of Alinsky's Rules for Radicals and many other communist texts. And that, I think, is super important, and people don't really understand it. And yet, look, yes, it was a tragedy. This man died. Yes, I believe that it was murder. Yes, it was completely wrong. But what happened in that same city when a Muslim cop murdered a white woman?
Yeah. See, when was that? That was not too long ago, a few months ago.
Yeah, it was less than a year ago. I do know that. It was less than a year. And nobody says anything about it. Nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about, listen, if we're going to have a conversation about murdering of people, and we're going to have a conversation about murdering based on race or based on ideology, then let's have a full conversation. Let's not just talk about some of it and not talk about the rest of it. We should be having the conversation and saying, look, let's have a real serious dialogue. Or what about the fact that, all of these riots are destroying their own communities.
Yep.
They're destroying their own communities. And more importantly, they're not doing anything other than shitting on the memory of George Floyd. If they truly believe that he's a martyr, then all they're doing is shitting on the memory. But here's the thing. And this takes me back to oh God, what is his name? The pudding pop guy. His name escapes me right now. I'm having an old man moment.
Trayvon Martin?
No. The guy who was the Huxtable. Oh God, what is his name? The guy who got convicted of rape. The black guy. The older black guy. He's like 80 or something.
Bill Cosby?
Yeah, that's who it is. Bill Cosby. It takes me back to Bill Cosby. So before everybody was accusing
the fudge pop. Jesus.
Yeah. Before everybody was accusing Bill Cosby of sexual assault and harassment, Bill Cosby actually used to go on tour. And he used to speak in front of crowds. And one of the things that he spoke out against was thug and thought culture. He said, look, if you're an African-American and you subscribe to thug and thought culture, you are hurting your communities. You are destroying your communities. And he used to speak out against it. And all these people who made excuses for why they can't do this and why they can't do that. And I think the reality is that, the one of the advantages of the United States is that, and this was especially true of Dr. Martin Luther King. Now, they didn't call him doctor because it was an honorary title. They called him doctor because he actually went to college and he got a PhD. Okay? A man in this, before civil rights were a thing, got a PhD. Let that sink in. Take as much time as you need. The same thing is true with a lot of individuals out there, is that all these people in the civil rights era, they all had postgraduate degrees. All the main voices had postgraduate degrees, or they had PhDs of some kind. But the issue that I'm saying is that, look, if you have a problem with your financial state, change your job. If you have a problem with your neighborhood, or you have a problem with where you're living, change where you live. If you have a problem with your government suppressing what you're doing, change your government. Yeah. I'm trying to figure out, and I think the thing that's important with George Floyd, which I think is extremely important, is it's a Democrat governor, it's a Democrat mayor, it's a Democrat police chief, Democratic policies, Democrat laws, yet somehow it's Republicans' responsibility. You know, and I have to say, I disagree with a lot of what Van Jones said, but he hit the nail on the head. He said, the most dangerous group of people to black people are white Hillary Clinton supporters. Yeah. And I think that he says a lot without actually saying it in that statement, in that a lot of leftist ideology is hypocritical and it's discriminatory. And you see this occasionally where it rears its ugly head.
They're legitimately fucking racist too. Look at Joe Biden. If you don't vote for me, you ain't black. Holy fuck. Like, that wasn't just some haha joke. Like, he actually meant that. You could just look at him saying, it's like, damn, dude, you're going to dictate how I vote based on race. Imagine if Mitt Romney said in 2012, you ain't white if you vote for Barack Obama. People would have lost their fucking shit. But Joe Biden says that, and he's like, oh, my bad. I shouldn't have been joking. It's like, fuck you, man. You're a fucking racist piece of shit.
Well, and I think that the issue here, too, is if you look at the rioting, I know we talked a little bit about this before the show started today, but when we talk about the rioting, we need to discuss it in a way that I think is relevant. It's, a lot of people try to compare it to the Rodney King riot, and I honestly don't believe that there's any comparison at all. I think that when it comes to this sort of thing, I think that the best comparison is that this is insurrection. And even President Trump tweeted, I want to say he tweeted today about how this was basically organized. It was very well coordinated and very well organized. And I think that's absolutely true. So, when we talk about these riots, I mean, I even saw pictures, we were talking earlier, I even saw pictures of staging bricks. There was a whole pallet of bricks staged in the riot zones so people could just go grab bricks and throw them through windows. So, I mean, there's a lot of issues here. It is Antifa and the radical left. That Trump is right there. I'm looking at the tweet right now. And so, that's the very organized on top. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't American citizens of conscience who support the opposition of what happened to George Floyd. That's not what I'm saying. I stand against racism. If you look at my videos on my channel, I've spoken out against racism many times. I've even done videos, specifically on that subject. But I think that when it comes to this whole thing, the death and destruction of all the people who have died since then, I think is completely unwarranted. And the other interesting thing, and kind of an inconvenient truth, is that if you notice what is being targeted, it's banks, it's financial institutions, it's government buildings and agencies, basically symbols of capitalism. It's
even beyond that. They robbed a guy. What was it? It was in Dallas, I think, in a huge mall. They ransacked the Louis Vuitton store. It's like, yes. You're really honoring the death of this guy and the fucked up treatment by stealing handbags. Like, you're a fucking piece of shit.
Well, and if this was about race, I mean, I think George Bruno posted a video link earlier today on Twitter. If this was really about race, they wouldn't be pulling black people out of their cars and beating them. And that's exactly what happened on that video. If people go to George Bruno's Twitter, they can see that video. And again, it's an atrocity, but it also destroys the credibility of any of the protests. And you've got, NBC anchors going, don't call them rioters, call them protesters. Well, yeah, because you want to reframe it. They're rioters. Okay. It's insurrection. And frankly, all these organizers and all these charity groups that are funding these things,
Here's the video, by the way.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a tragedy. It's a complete tragedy.
How do you think no, I agree with you. And I saw Trump tweeting that, this is organized and planned to some degree and all that. I think on top of that, though, you have the pandemic kind of shit playing into it. People have been pent up. In Florida, it's been great, but the rest of the country's been cooped up. How do you think that's playing into this? People are just frustrated and pissed off to begin with. Is this like do you think maybe an outlash of that?
Well, here's the thing. Obviously, the COVID has killed people. But when you look at the actual numbers of the coronavirus compared to what the government has reported, it's all bullshit. You know, the mortality rate is lower than the flu. And even though the infection rate is high, most people are asymptomatic.
Dude, the CDC just estimated the new mortality rate is like 0.026% or some shit. Like fucking some stupidly low number.
Correct. I think that the coronavirus, and I said this on my Twitter feed earlier today, I think that the coronavirus was a false flag attempt to destroy the economy. If you look at what Nancy Pelosi said and what the Democratic leadership said and the leftist leadership said in 2017 and 2018, they said that in order to defeat Trump, they had to destroy the economy. Well, how do you destroy the economy? Well, in the United States, it's actually pretty easy because we don't have a manufacturing economy anymore. The primary thrust of our economy and our workforce is service industry. And in the last 5 to 10 years, that industry has been composed primarily of gig economy. In other words, independent contractors, DoorDash, Uber, people who are independent contractor journalists. The traditional jobs for many Americans no longer exist. And on top of that, if you follow, some of the financial trends like Zero Hedge and the Economic Collapse blog or the American Thinker and a lot of those other, financial sites that actually pay attention to the macro trends of the country, most Americans before COVID did not have $500 in their bank account, in their savings account. They did not have money to make any kind of major purchase. And we are living at a time where we have the lowest home ownership in the country that we've seen since the 1929 Depression. So with that context in mind, you bring in something like the coronavirus and you have everybody, basically riding the hype train, scaring everybody. Now you have the gig economy collapsed. I think in the last 30 to 40 days, there have been, I want to say it was 40 million unemployment claims in that period. Okay. That is close to 25% of the workforce. Okay. So you have a lot of people who are financially destitute. They're borderline homeless. They're angry. They don't have a job to go to. And then you have all these nonprofits. You've got the Southern Poverty Law Center. You've got all these Antifa groups like By Any Means Necessary. You've got the ACLU. You've got a plethora of feminist groups and social justice groups everywhere with massive amounts of funding from George Soros and everybody else. And they're being funded by the Ford Foundation and everybody else. And I've talked about this in videos. So this is not something that I haven't done a deep dive into. All these people have these money. They're paying these protesters. The protesters go out in the middle of the street, and they are the core of every riot that happens. And then when Antifa shows up and they're being funded and provided material support, now everything turns into a shit show. And again, you'll notice that the main areas where the riots are the worst, they are left strongholds. They are left-wing strongholds who are strongholds for Antifa, and they are funded by the left. There are no riots in the conservative cities.
I was just going to say, where are the conservative? Even Orlando has a lot of liberal shit, and nothing's going on here because the state, doesn't operate like that. Even I haven't heard of anything even in Miami going on. Now, I'd be if I lived in Miami, I'd be worried. But as of right now, there's nothing going on that I know of. Yeah, Florida's great, man. Florida's the best state in the union. Fuck yeah.
I don't know about that. You guys have Florida, man. So
that's right. Florida, you're looking at them, dude.
Right. Yeah. But I'm just saying that I think that I think that you can't ignore the fact that even though this supposed tragedy happened, you can't ignore the fact that these riots all around the country, anti-capitalistic riots. You can't ignore the fact that it happened right after Trump made his executive orders against China.
China, and he pulled out of the WHO. He terminated that. They sent the tech censorship thing. Yeah, it's this whole year has just been holy fuck, dude. Especially from a manager perspective, with Make Women Great Again, that whole media explosion, then leading into the pandemic stuff, then leading into all this bullshit. Now it's this is epic, man. This year, I mean, what happened last year? I barely even remember at this point.
I think that what the good thing is it feminism thought they won. We are the resistance. This is not about a war anymore. We're the resistance. Feminism won. Social justice won. The deep state won. And now everybody is standing against it. And you see the common man rising up saying, I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. I'm an American citizen with American rights, and I don't want my rights trampled on by some Nazi Democrat. Sorry. And you see, I mean, look at all the protests for the lockdowns. All the lockdowns shut down because they realized it was bullshit. I really believe this was an effort at a soft coup. And all of a sudden you saw patriotic Americans standing up left and right by the millions. And now they have to fight back.
I can reference, blogs websites like Reason.com and these other libertarian sites. For years, they would bitch, rightfully so, about executive overreach and the executive branch of government, the presidency getting way too powerful, right? Obama was famous for saying that, he had his pen and his phone, right? He could just do whatever he fucking wanted like a king. And I think the deep state and stuff, and even the feminists, that supported all this crap and the SJWs, they got way overconfident. And because of that, they overpowered the executive branch for decades. And they never in a million years, I think, dreamed that they would lose it to someone, especially to someone like Trump. Never mind someone they didn't control. Someone they didn't control, and then on top of that, the guy is, fucking Trumpzilla, Chadzilla. Like, the guy has a dick swagger of Godzilla's tail. I mean, this guy has, like, this guy isn't, if he isn't, sparring with China, he's walking around North Korea literally on foot. I mean, this guy is just fucking, I love it, man. I love it. It's perfect. But I think, there's an old saying, you're probably familiar with it yourself, and it's that tyranny sows the seeds of its own destruction, or evil sows the seeds of its own destruction. And I think that the presidency is central to that they overpowered that whole branch of government in that position. And then eventually they fucked up when they lost it. And we're seeing the results of that. And I think that's why I agree with what you're saying, that this whole thing, there's been multiple basic coups on the president at this point, from the impeachment, fiasco, the Russiagate stuff, all these fucking hoaxes, this other crap. They're scrambling to get him out of office, because if they don't, they're going to lose. He even said the other day on an interview, he said, what did he say? He says, we have a chance to crush the deep state, or break them, to break the deep state, I think was what he said. And man, to see a sitting U.S. president say that, it's delightful. It's everything we dreamed of with Ron Paul back in the day, 2008, 2012. Trump's actually doing it, and it's glorious, man. I'm fucking loving it. I never in my lifetime thought I'd be proud of a sitting U.S. president more than I am ever. Never mind more than I am right now, which is fucking awesome.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, no, you're good. You're good. And like I said, I mean, obviously, the president isn't perfect, but I think that it's also one of those scenarios. I think that the left is overgamed.
Yes.
Sargon of Akkad recently did a video about the politics of Demolition Man, the old movie. Yeah. And one of the scenes, as you were ranting, one of the scenes that reminded me of your rant is there's a section that Sargon goes into where the head of the social justice government, he has an implant on Wesley Snipes where Wesley Snipes can't kill him. So Wesley Snipes has been trying to kill him the whole movie. He can't kill him because he's got this implant that prevents him. So he throws his gun to one of his subordinates and goes, "You shoot him." So then the guy ends up getting shot. And the guy's totally surprised because he'd been overgaming everything, but he missed this key element because he was so busy overgaming. He left these massive loopholes you can drive a Mack truck through. And I think that's what happened with the social justice movement. Is that, patriots have been kind of biding their time, and they've been kind of waiting for things to happen. And they're like, okay, now we need to stand up for our rights, because if we don't, we will no longer exist as a culture or a country. And so I think that is extremely important. And I think that, that's why Trump was able to do what he's been able to do. And I'll tell you what, I never thought in my lifetime that I would ever see an executive order against social media, especially after, litigating my lawsuit for nearly a year and having a complete news blackout. Here's the thing too, even the free speech YouTubers, with the exception of people associated with Red Man Group and Terrence Pop and Honey Badger Radio, no one has covered my lawsuit. People that are like, I'm super free speech, and they like run for the hills. So I think it's pretty funny when we have this conversation, and I'm not saying that they're false flags or they're limited hangouts or anything like that. I just think it's interesting that when it comes time to defend free speech, that everybody has to wait for Trump to do it, and nobody is willing to do it on their own, and they're not willing to support other people to do that, because maybe of the 10 things we agree on, there's one they disagree with, and all of a sudden they've got to be silent about it. I just think the whole thing is really interesting. Well, and it also speaks to people's character.
Exactly. People are way too passive today. I mean, even if they have good intentions and whatnot, legitimately good intentions, they expect things that just kind of happen on their own. I'm gonna hashtag this will happen. Blah blah blah. Women are hoes, women are thoughts. Maybe everything will just collapse and it'll fix itself. Now, I get bitched at, not only from feminists, but most of the manosphere, I think, supports Make Women Great Again. It's been such a fantastic thing to see, triggering and making all these feminists cry. Very legitimate and very, very savage tears. But there's a few, there's some in the manosphere who really hate what I'm doing. They don't like it. They don't support it. And because they just expect, women, I think, are in the shitter right now culturally. They've really collapsed in their femininity and all these different things, single motherhood and all this other crap they do. And it's
I agree. Yeah, and I agree with that. But I also think too that when it comes to men who are trying to improve themselves, and those voices, especially those associated with 21, who
Yeah.
are trying to help men improve themselves, for their own internal validation's sake, I think that the thing that a lot of the manosphere misses is, as masculine men who are internally validated, a lot of voices don't really promote our civic duty, our
Yeah.
civic responsibility to our communities.
Well, there's a
And
reason for that. There's a lot of closet Bernie bros, like basically closet leftists in the manosphere that don't come out as that. They kind of stay out of politics, or they're kind of averse to it. You've called them out on your channel. They're pussies, man.
yeah, yeah.
They're not just pussies. They're hiding something. They're hiding their actual political beliefs that they're just too cowardly to come out with. That they like socialism and they like communism or whatever. And they like.
Well, and I think that really what it is that they're professional manosphere personalities,
Yep.
and they don't actually believe what it is they preach. They're trying to make a buck. This is their job.
Exactly. They're politicians. It's my job too, but I'm much more. I love telling the truth and making people very angry. That's my job, as I see it in some ways. And
Well,
these
yeah,
people,
I mean, you're a troll, definitely.
Professional troll, king of the trolls.
But you believe in what it is you say. I mean, that's the difference. Is there's a lot of people out there, who don't believe in what they say. That's why they don't want to talk politics, because you don't want to see the mask come off.
I believe in what I say to the bone. I mean, I really stand behind what I do, from the future is masculine to supporting the manosphere to putting fathers together into an event to make women great again. Everything I do in public is what I am. Yeah, these other people, they're these polished politicians. They're basically, it's like a swamp in the manosphere is what they are, and not enough guys see it. They have the red pill blind spot, you call it. They buy into these characters that are online. In real life, these people are frauds. They fucking suck with women. They're cringeworthy as fuck. They're socially retarded. There's losers a lot of the time, but they go online anonymously or in public, sometimes with a face. And they make up all this bullshit persona. People buy into it. I think manosphere guys buy into it just because the culture war has been, like you said, like feminism won, and so they're desperate to see anybody who promotes red pill stuff and manosphere stuff and MGTOW stuff. They're like so thirsty for a positive, what appears to even be a positive voice. They'll let anything slide. It's like, no, a lot of these guys are scumbags. They're here just to make money, the book merchants and shit, and that's it. They don't care about.
And I think, and I also think that they're extremists, right? It's more about a cult of personality as opposed to let's help everybody move forward and let's work together. Yep. I mean, I have to say that that's one of the things that I really appreciate about the Red Man Group is you have a lot of people from different tribes of the manosphere who come together and have conversations and be able to go, look, here's where we're at. Now, our schedules don't necessarily allow us to all be here at the same time, but I think that when it comes to this sort of thing, we have to be able to appreciate all these different perspectives and to appreciate how to move forward and to appreciate the fact that sometimes we disagree, And so I think that, again, when you have this sort of thing where you have this cult of personality, you have these people where their whole channel is to break somebody else down, or their whole channel is to attack somebody else, or their whole message is, well, you just got to be more alpha, bro. Well, let me tell you something. If you're standing in front of 20 cops in riot gear, you're going to out alpha that 20-man squad. I mean, really?
Yep. Let's shift gears before we wrap up today. Back to the riots. Let me pull this up. So from a manosphere perspective, red pill perspective, what do you think about the rioters who are not paid shills from Soros or whatever, who are just for whatever reason out looting and stealing shit? What do you think about them from a single motherhood perspective, breakdown of families? Because I see that a lot. That's what when this was going on in the middle of the night last night, I was up pretty late. I'm like, dude, all these fucking people. First of all, these are all somebody's kids, right? Whether they're adults or not, they were somebody's fucking children. Well, somebody fucked up along the way, and these people. Well,
and I can tell you right now that when again, I said this earlier in the stream today. Studies have shown conclusively that the biggest indicator of whether or not someone will grow up to be a criminal is whether they were raised in a broken home or they were victimized as a child. So a lot of these looters, not the paid shills, but the actual looters, these are just desperate children raised in broken homes who were abused or neglected as children, and they have grown up to be criminals. They've grown up with a weak value system. And so they're like, well, you know what? I need a Louis Vuitton handbag, or, I need a new TV, or I need this.
I'm mad about George Floyd, so I'm gonna steal his 56-inch Samsung 4K TV. What a fucking bunch of scumbags, man. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's my point. That's why
they were raised this way, though. Yeah, they're shitty culture and stuff.
They're raised this way, and that's the problem is that our culture is shifted to such a degree that these people did not have the proper mentorship that they needed to be able to become reasonable citizens in our country. And the reality is that you even have some people that are raised in a broken home, but they're not necessarily criminals by nature. But the problem is that when you're desperate and you have a weak value system, what ends up happening is that the second that you stress somebody out, all of a sudden their values go out the window and they become animals and they suffer their base instincts. That's why I think that if you look at the coronavirus and you look at the isolation that happened with the coronavirus and the economic collapse associated with it, and then you turn around and you apply that as the stage for these riots, you have a lot of people that aren't working right now. And you have a lot of people that are financially or on the verge of financial destitution and homelessness right now. They're losing their fucking minds. You know, when you have this amount of people who are so desperate, all you have is civil unrest. And we've seen this in the history books going back hundreds of years. So like none of this is new if you've looked at the history on this type of thing. I mean, we're in a perfect storm scenario, but again, these people they're pieces of garbage, and really they need to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. And then what's interesting is that the mayors in all these leftist cities are like, look, we agree with your protests, but the violence has to stop. Even they understand it.
Yeah, actually, so you know what else I'm thinking about going through this discussion too is not only all the values and the poor parenting, the single motherhood, and all this, the fatherlessness, right? All this we've talked about this in the show many times, but also the things like the more attitudes that we see in women today and men that are, you know, broken and raised dysfunctionally. So with the women, though, we see the entitlement. And there's a video, I don't need to pull it up here, but you can look up the articles, type woman slaps cop. And there's a woman, I guess, in Baltimore who slapped a cop twice, a white cop, and then a black cop just laid her out clean. Like absolutely, because
I saw that. Yeah, he touched her right in the jaw, and she just folded over like a table.
Yep. And I'm thinking, who knows? She looked Hispanic, but someone said she was white. Paul Joseph Watson. I don't know what race she was. Who cares? The point is, she's a woman, and she decided to slap a cop not once but twice, and then got laid the fuck out clean. And it's like, what the fucking entitlement to physically? There's an entitlement there. Like you're delusional to assault somebody who's stronger than you like that, way stronger. On top of that, the guy's law enforcement, uniformed, everything. And he wasn't doing anything. He was just trying to calm her down. Like he wasn't he wasn't kneeing her in the neck, right? She wasn't dying or anything. It was just ridiculous bullshit. But it reminds me of the attitude that attitude is so common today for women, right? Whether they're 20 years old or 40 years old, the Karens, they're fucking just nuts.
Well, and let's be real. I saw that video. Yeah. It would have taken him a moment to find her neck. That was a big woman.
Yeah. It was a big woman.
She was a big woman. Like Department of Licensing wants to get her in there so they can give her a license, you know, and stick it on her ass so they know who she is. Yeah. I mean, it's like I said, she big woman, but yeah, I mean, you're right. The Karens of the world have been allowed to run amok. And again, people think that just because somebody complains that somehow we should give credibility to that complaint where no credibility should be given. But I think that, you know, the whole Karen meme is really, it's a Gen Z backlash against all the feminist entitlement. And you see this and the single motherhood entitlement. Again, it's a pandemic. It's an ideological pandemic, and it's destroying inner cities. And again, going back to my book, I talk about the differences between children raised in an intact family compared to children raised in a broken home. And you see this every day. And by the way, when I say broken home, what I mean is any child who is not raised by their biological mother and biological father. That's a child raised in a broken home. So if a woman dumps her husband and then goes and gets a new stepfather, that child's going to be raised in a broken home. And they've done studies and they found that even though that child is raised by a stepfather and a mother, or a stepmother and a father, what they found is that those children still behave as though they are raised in a broken home, because that biological connection is absolutely crucial. So when I talk about broken home, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about kids taken out of their homes through foster care, you know, and they were in decent families. I'm talking about, you know, all these different things where people just, they don't appreciate, you know, the value of the extended family. So I think that that's important.
Can I learn about this in the Feminist Lie? Looks like I can.
Yeah, you can. Yes, you can.
Fuck yeah. Well, hey, we'll wrap up for today's show. I appreciate your time. It's been a great episode. Very bizarre time in history, but now you live in interesting times. I think we certainly do. So that's been episode 105. DDJ, again, appreciate your time. Guys, make sure you pick up his book on Amazon, The Feminist Lie. You can also find him at Miss Andry Today on YouTube and missandrytoday.com. That's the URL, right?
Sorry, I muted myself again. Yes, that's the URL. And don't forget about Miss Andry Today on bitshoot.com.
And BitChute, yeah. Also, of course, this show is sponsored by the 21 Convention events. We have tickets to the main event coming out soon, about 10 days from now. Those have not been on sale yet this year. Tickets are on sale to the Patriarch Edition. That's what I was referring to. You can also go to the 21convention.org, get on the VIP list so you get updates about the events. And, of course, tickets are available for the ladies, young, old, whatever you guys want, middle-aged. Welcome to come out, and you can help make women great again. All three events, the main event, the Patriarch Edition, and the women's event, will be going on October 1st to October 4th, with the exception of the 22 convention, which will start a day later on October 2nd. That announcement was made on the manosphere.org on the official statement I made about a month and a half ago now. Finally, make sure you visit 21university.com. Start your free trial, 30 days free. You get early access, ad-free access, and higher quality video, actually streaming than YouTube, on the university. We also have apps coming out soon on the iPhone and Android stores to download and experience everything. Super pro apps, and those will be free with the membership. Everyone else, DDJ, appreciate your time. Appreciate you guys tuning in. And tune in next Saturday. And we'll have a very big, huge, even with a Y, guest coming on the show for next weekend's episode. You'll see that on Twitter and the announcement before then. Peace out, homies. DDJ, thank you again.
Yep. Take care, guys.